All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Yes.
Tuesdays, right?
Yeah. Does it technically count as like a third of the way through the week? I mean,
Yeah, we're still close of the weekend. Of course, we already passed the weekend, but we're still close.
hey, it is Taco Tuesday, so I think that's worth
Right.
celebrating, right? We don't talk about
That's
that one enough.
that's
Um,
true. That's true.
yeah.
That's
So,
agree.
welcome everyone to our show, Transform Tuesdays. If you've never seen the show before, what we're here to talk about today is data transformation, right? And transformation tools. And today I have Marcus Montenegro here with me. Marcus, do you want to give an introduction?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Marcos Montenegro, one of the Alteryx aces here from Data Mining. We have many, but I'm one of those. Yeah, and I'm one of the Alteryx experts here, and really like data analytics. So yeah, let's see what we get for today.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of talk through some of this, right? So our theme today is the Earth, right? So we've got a lot of holidays centered around the Earth this week, and obviously that's feels all encompassing, right? So that could be everything from um, like geology, right? The ocean, all types of things, or even cool like my shirt with worms, right? Earthworms. So we can totally play some of um, on some of these things today, and we'll kind of talk about a bunch of different subjects related to the Earth and some cool data sources. And ironically, part of my Inspire talk that I'll be giving here in it's actually almost exactly a month to the day will be centered around 3D printing and talking about the Earth a little bit. All right.
Yeah, I'm
So
excited to see that. And actually, that 3D printing will be something awesome to watch. So I'm going to be there.
I'm not hauling the 3D printing there,
Oh
sadly.
man.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
I
disappointing.
actually I actually just end up using maker spaces, but I'm trying to convince my wife that we need one, or
Okay.
at least a glow forge or something, so we can do some CNC stuff. She's almost convinced. I told her I can make toys for our son David, and I think with that I'm slowly chipping away. She's like, "Man, these toys are expensive." I was like, "I know. I could just be making them in the garage right now." So
Right? Yeah, you need to tell how much you gonna reducing your expenses,
exactly.
with toys and that stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. And
totally is
he
the
can
way.
pick, right? He can design his own toys.
Exactly. Can use his imagination so you can even stimulate that piece as well.
Exactly. And then, like, full circle, bringing this back about the earth, right? I can tell her, hey, think of how much packaging and stuff we're going to be saving because literally it's just going to come and it's going to be raw materials, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Perfect.
it'll be interesting. Awesome. So, do you want to go ahead and kick us off, Marcus, and share uh, what you're going to be doing the transformation and stuff off today on?
Sure. Yeah, let me first talk about this data set I'm bringing today. And I found that's really cool data set here from Berkeley Earth. They are showing to us on that data set the average temperature per month, since a real while ago. So like you can see here, since uh, yeah, really while ago. So yeah, so I'm taking a look on that data set here on Alteryx. And as you can see, that data set here is opened not just per day, but actually by city, country. So we have a really interesting level of data here.
Mm,
And as you can see, you have more than 8 million rows here. So that's
wow.
a lot, man. That's a lot. Yeah, of course, we have rows here without data. I think probably it is a little difficult to get data from 1743, but anyway, by some way they did.
We might want to question the accuracy of that data, right?
Right? I don't know if they had a guy there, with something, a thermometer, and someone in the future will need this. So let me know. I don't know if they had that guy, but anyway. But that's really interesting. And that goes to 2013. So we'll have some time to analysis here. I did some transformations here on that data because, as you can see, we have numerals here, and actually that temperature here is not on Fahrenheit, so that's on Celsius. I know
Mm,
you guys here from US will not usually are not so used to see it on Celsius, so let's make that easy and change everything to Fahrenheit. So
yeah,
I did all the preparation here on that data to can analyze that a little better. So I changed it here. I converted that date here to be a real date field because everything comes to us as a string, so we can't operate really well with dates in this format. So I just changed it here to have you know, a proper field to work with dates. And like you can see here, it's really easy to do that. Right now, I already have, after this single tool here, I already have my converted field. So,
nice.
really easy to do that transformation here. So looks like the same, but that one here, I can work with dates really better, right?
Oh yeah. And
And
dates are always tricky with transformation tools, right? There's so many ways that you can handle those, and I think that's something that we take for granted in any transformation tool is that um, it's definitely come a long way over the years, right? Converting different field types and then also how they're managed, right? Because now literally you can just say, no, I want it to be readable, like I want the name of the date written out, right? Or like if you're, I don't know if they do this in, I think they do it in Brazil. We were talking about that. It's year, day, month, right?
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
and we
actually,
had
it's
the
day. Actually, here's day, month, year.
day, month, year, yeah. So
Yes,
there's so many different formats, right? And
exactly.
sometimes, like you'll look at it, especially at the beginning of the month, right? When it's 419, that's not too bad, right? You can tell pretty clearly. But if they were all numbers and it's like 4 6, right? You're like, ooh, I don't know. That could be a day or a month, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and looks for example, day 1st of January on 2001.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
what's that? What's that date? I don't know. Right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
hopefully you can at least rely on how it was input in the database, right? So you can make some inferences, but that could
Yeah.
that could even mean that the database got reset, right? And then you're like, oh shoot, I don't know when that day is.
Exactly. So yeah, you can face a few challenges working with dates. And yeah, I already faced a few, mainly when you have different date formats in the same column. That's always a mess to deal with,
Ah,
you
man.
know.
Yeah, I'm
But
thankful
and
for the AI getting a little smarter, right? So when we talk about like Tableau Prep, Trifacta, even like Auto Insights within Alteryx, right? And other tools, they'll actually use AI to analyze a column and they'll say, yeah, these all look like dates, right? And then they'll literally ask in a recipe or something else, they'll say, hey, if we are examining this, right, and they are all dates, would you like me to convert them to a standard form, right? And it'll just reconcile that column. That's when I'm sitting there and I'm like, I can enjoy my coffee today, right?
exactly, exactly. That's the best case, right? Yeah, we
Exactly.
need to use the right tool for the right goal. That's correct. So yeah, on Alteryx, unfortunately don't have that here, but even when you have many different formats, we have our tricks, right, to do to make that happen. So, for example, in the past, I already dealt with that challenge just using a formula tool because you also can change the format using the formula tool. So you can just use the regex match, and use the datetime format based on the regex match to see what is the format you have there and how you can convert. So yeah, it's much more difficult to do it, but yeah, we have our ways, right? We need to
Exactly.
be imaginative. We need to have that piece as well.
Yeah, it's like
So
terraforming our data set, right? We've got to
like
make
that.
sure that it looks the way that we want to, so it's hospitable.
Exactly. Yeah, so here I work at doing that transformation in the dates. We can work with that. And yeah, just a little other tweaks here with the date with the format for the numeric columns you have here, that average temperature
Mhm.
and the uncertainty as well. Just that few tweaks here and cleaning my data to don't have that null rows here. So right now I have that clean data set here where you can really operate and find the data you want.
Mm.
So and as you can see with that three tools here, I already cleaned all my data. So I already have everything I need to start
Nice.
my data analysis. So
That's
that's
impressive. I mean, I was expecting to see like a formula tool with like 50 formulas in it, and you were like, yeah, I got it all done in one tool, right?
right. Yeah, and actually you can do things like that here, but you know we need to think about the other person who will work with that. So many times you can think like, oh, I will do my fancy workflow here with many cool stuff, put in less tools as possible to show how I know to do the things, but you need to think maybe the other guy who will take that workflow tomorrow doesn't know. So
Exactly. Oh, this is just a formula tool, right? I'll remove it, and
yeah,
not even
that's cool.
realizing half the logic's in there, right?
Exactly. And when go to that formula, you see, like you said, 15 formulas there, and oh man, where I start here, and will
Exactly.
be completely loose, you know. But yeah, I split that to be very clear here on my steps, and when you do a documentation for that, to share that is a lot easier to everyone can take a look and already understand. So we'll have the moments where we really need to do that fancy way to put everything together, even to optimize the performance of that transformation for some
Mm.
cases. But yeah, for others, for that perspective of uh, sharing with other people can be good as well to split. So yeah, right now here where I have everything cleaned to work with, and here is where I do two magics, right? So I work with that operation to get the year date. That way I can filter and I can summarize my data per year in a
Yeah.
easy way. But I also do here my conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and that way we can talk here, right? About that temperatures. I mean, to be totally honest with you, that Fahrenheit, I really don't understand. When you tell anything to me in Fahrenheit, I will not understand you. To be totally honest.
Yeah, I think the only thing I appreciate with that is um, it makes 100 degrees Fahrenheit a whole lot more bearable. It's like, oh, that's not too bad, right? Like that's common here. Whereas like the Celsius, I mean, you've got like half as many degrees essentially, right? When we're looking at it to do that comparison. So I on the surface, it always feels like it's more granular, right? Because you're multiplying by 1.8. But the thing that always throws me off is whenever you say, "Oh, it's freezing," right?
Mhm.
And it's 32 degrees, right? That doesn't sound, you're like, "Oh, 32 degrees Celsius. That's pretty nice, right? That's like perfect
Right.
weather." And then here
Exactly.
it's like, "No, that's actually cold." And if it's 0 here, then that's like really scary, right? That's like,
Right.
what is that? Negative 16 degrees Celsius. So yeah,
Mhm.
it gets pretty intense.
Yeah, actually, as you said, for example, for me, 86 Fahrenheit, and I'm looking in the other screen to see the conversion because, as I
Yeah.
said, doesn't make any sense for me. But anyway, I am looking here. The 86 Fahrenheit is a really cool weather for me.
Mm,
It's like 30 Celsius. But when I was my first time in New York, I was there and saw something. Actually, there was 0 Celsius. Yeah, around zero Celsius. And
yeah.
I looked at to the thermometer and I saw 32, 33, something like that.
Did you put some shorts or
And
something on?
yeah, and that's good, man. Yeah, I just live in the airport. Yeah, that's all fine. We can go there and just look into everyone with coats and that stuff. Oh, man, something's wrong here.
Oh no.
I think I missed something. So yeah, I
Yeah.
needed to return and put a few more clothes. You know.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the Earth, right, the other common measurement is like going to be feet versus meters. So,
Right.
like when we talk about traveling, like Denver's going to be the Inspire conference coming up here in a month, right?
Hmm.
You also have Tableau conference coming up here literally the same week, which still blows my mind.
Yeah.
Um, and that's going to be in Las Vegas. So when we look at those, if you're looking at heights and elevation, right? Um, Denver is literally called the Mile High City, right? So that's because it's over a mile high in terms of elevation. Uh, and that's actually where I grew up. So there's like altitude sickness and nosebleeds and all those kinds of things
Yeah.
that you have just by going there even to visit,
Hmm.
that a lot of people aren't conscious of. So like I'll be curious to see if they end up doing, like normally they'll do the running event or something, right? If they end
Hmm.
up doing some things like that. And even the conversion there, right? If I told you, hey, it's over 5,000 feet in elevation, right? Your perception of that is not necessarily going to be the same, right?
Hmm.
And so we have to make sure that when we're looking at the Earth, we're making sure we're doing the same measurements, right? That's going to be true when we go to space, right? And there's literally a
That's
whole
right.
nother axis that we're going to be learning about as we kind of do some of that.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is when you think about those calculations, right? Now's our opportunity to get those right. Because when we go into space, it's going to be a lot less forgiving. You're, if you didn't pack your coat and you're going to Mars, you're not going to be
Yeah.
able to turn around and go get it, right? So
Exactly.
we're going to need to be thinking about some of those things smarter. And I think this is essentially the analytics that are going to drive some of that. And even when we talk about temperatures, right, that's going to be important because this will almost be like when people first started tracking temperature, right? For
Hmm.
crops here on the globe, we have hundreds of years worth of weather data, right? And then you even
Hmm.
have like the farmer's almanac and those types of things, right? To understand, hey, here's when we should be planting the crops. If we start to try and grow crops on other planets, right? Do we have any sense of what those seasons are, et cetera, right? Those all relate to the Earth and our atmosphere. And are we going to have the same outputs in terms of that, or even like soil composition, right? Those are lots of things that we have to learn.
Hmm.
And like one of our clients, NASA, um, I think people don't realize it's more than just space exploration, right? They're exploring all these different things and even COVID, right? So when we look at this, it's more about scientific exploration, and that's really their charter. And I think when we look at the Earth, right, there's so much of that that's going to be entailed going into the future as we become stewards of that, right? To understanding the holistic picture. And these types of things, when we're talking about the Earth today, actually play in now to some of our strategic goals as companies, right? When we talk about climate change, et cetera, now there's actually dollars tied to that. And we
Mhm.
may be trying to understand, hey, what's some of the temperature changes around our factory, right? Maybe it's a data center or even just a manufacturing facility, right? Or if we're trying to do a zero carbon footprint, right? With everybody traveling to conferences and stuff, are we trying to offset that, right? And I just saw that from Southwest, which was really cool. They had a little calculator that said, hey, just put in your flight information and we'll tell you how many trees you can plant. And you can use your points, your airline miles, to essentially plant those trees if you would like, or we can do that. Um, or we can do that for you and you can just pay us in dollars, right? So that's
Exactly.
literally like a conversionary aspect between points and dollars. And then you've got carbon emissions to offsetting that in some other means, right?
Yeah, no, I totally got you. And actually, one other thing to have in that math as well is like the nature disasters that
Yeah,
can start to happen more and more because of the climate change, right? So, and that will affect the all the business at some point, you know?
exactly. And that's actually huge. So, I mean, I'm here in Orlando, right? Everybody forgets about them for the season, and we have hurricane season that's coming up here soon, right? And as we kind of talk about that, that's every year. It's not going away. It may
Mhm.
be like shifting slightly, or you may or may not have any of those issues, but that definitely impacts operations, right?
Mhm.
And doing some of those things, like we've worked with some CPG companies, consumer packaged goods, right?
Mhm.
And there's simple things, right? So even if you're talking about making bread, we
Mhm.
think as bread is like, oh, okay, well, what would you need to be concerned about with bread, right? Well, typically bread is literally taken to the store within the same day or at least the same week and is distributed, right? So
Mhm.
the inventory is a very quick turnaround. So if all of a sudden it stops, right, that can mean your output for the entire week is gone. And then even when we talk about that, right, the hurricane may not hit that specific location, but when we're looking at weather data, right, there's actually, depending on which API you're pulling from, there's literally like just under 1,000 variables related to weather. So it could be humidity, right?
Mhm.
Um, the air quality, etc. Those things factor into making bread, right? So if a hurricane
Mhm.
comes, all of a sudden the humidity could go up. And when you're doing large recipes, that may affect how much water you put in, right? Because you don't want to end up with soggy loaves. Because if it's soggy, either you're not going to be able to sell it at all, or when you put it on the shelf, it's not going to last as long because it has more water content in there and it's more likely to get moldy, right?
Mhm.
So those are simple examples as we're looking at this, where like we may be looking at that and saying, okay, can we impact our operations by using data that's here from the earth, right? Because we all interact with that. And then is that going to improve the quality of our operations, our ROI, et cetera? Another example of that with a bread company would also be like they have the pans that they actually make the bread in. If, for
Mhm.
instance, let's say the hurricanes always go like right up by Louisiana and stuff, right? So as we kind of talk about that, um, they may need to distribute that workload to other locations and shut down that location to protect it against a storm, right? When they
Mhm.
do that, those supplies may be like the loaf pans because literally the loaves and stuff have to cool. So you need enough materials from a supply chain perspective in order to make up that difference at your other facilities, right? And this is where some of that geolocation distribution happens. And Marcus, it's like you queued this up for me perfect because I literally have a workflow. In this
Mhm.
case, it's actually talking about earthquakes. So this is one of the weekly challenges. So if you've never checked out the weekly challenges before with Alteryx, they literally have an input file that they give you, right? And then they tell you, hey, here's the outputs that we would like to achieve, right? So in this case, it's number of earthquakes by, and then relative magnitude, right? So it looks like a majority of the earthquakes are under a 5 or a 5.5, right? With some outside that standard deviation going all the way up to 6.2, right? And then the question is, where are those earthquakes at? So you can literally see them spread out across the globe. And you can see, hey, a lot of them are happening here in LATAM, right? And then a lot here along the Pacific Rim, right?
Yeah,
And
that's very interesting because you have many on the ocean as well.
oh yeah,
And that actually indicates also tsunamis,
yes,
because all that earthquakes in the ocean do that at some point.
yeah. And that's actually super interesting when you kind of talk about tsunamis, right? Because you can see a lot of the issues here, right? Where there is this, and we know that they had some issues with tsunamis a few years ago, right? And something, I don't know if you're aware of this from a data point perspective, they actually have like an international buoy system here in the Indian Ocean, right?
Mhm.
And what that does is those buoys are out there and they're essentially detecting the height of the water. And the reason why they have that is because, like, now we kind of know, but before, if you went back, I don't know, maybe 50, 100 years, right, the tsunami would just come out of nowhere, right? And you would have
Exactly.
no idea. You're not going to feel an earthquake in the middle of the ocean. So
Hmm.
the catch
Exactly.
is if that happens, right, um, you would at least have some type of notice because the buoys would be indicators. I mean, it may not be much time, like 5, 10 minutes, right? But that could mean the difference between somebody's life being saved or not, right? And
Hmm.
just like you have the tornado warnings, right, where they're looking for the cyclones, you can have that with earthquakes. And the other thing that they're doing is they're actually deploying um, little autonomous submarines that kind of float
Mm. Okay.
on the ocean current, right? And then those are collecting information about some of the sea motion further down under the water, and that helps us indicate hurricanes, right? But it's also helping us map the terrain under the ocean. So if we're seeing shifts, right, just like we monitor for earthquakes here on the surface by having sensors in the cracks, right? You can we can essentially do some of that with LiDAR data, right? Which is what I'll be talking about during my session at Inspire. You can gather some of that information and make better assessments going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That other one, looking the water flows, I never heard about.
Yeah,
Really, really cool to know about that. Yeah,
yeah,
I know about satellites, looking to the Earth, trying to find cyclones, hurricane, that stuff.
yeah.
Looking the cloud formation and the winds and that stuff. Yeah, and it's already pretty cool for me, to be honest. It's something to, if you stop and think, if you think about not 100, but just a dozen, uh, you know, a dozen years ago,
Yeah,
things like that, it would be unimaginable. So no one would say, no, no, in 2022, we're gonna have all the ways you predict when you have a disaster, a nature disaster,
exactly.
and you can do something about it, you know, to avoid to lose lives and that stuff. So,
Yeah.
man, that's for me is amazing. Our technology is going to someplace really incredible, I think.
I'm really just waiting for it to be like Back to the Future, where they literally tell us,
Right?
"Hey, it's gonna rain from uh, 12 to 12:05," right?
Hmm.
And what's crazy in my mind is we're actually not that far off from that. As scary as that sounds, we can't predict that far out, right?
Hmm.
But I get alerts from my weather app, and it's pretty accurate. It'll tell me within like 3 to 5 minutes, and then it'll also tell me when the showers are going to end, right? So I may only have 10 to 15 minutes notice, but if I'm out there like working on the yard, right,
Mhm.
I know at least, hey, I got to wrap this up and make sure everything's cleaned up before it starts raining. So I'm
Exactly.
not just completely caught off guard by sudden showers.
Yeah, you can do something about it,
Yeah.
before that happened. That's the thing. And yeah, I heard a few articles. I don't know, I just a couple weeks ago, and telling we already can see the weather in other planets. Why not to see our own planet? If you can take a look, I don't know. And I actually don't know how you guys call that. Yeah, Venus, like for example.
Yeah.
I think, so if you can do that, you can watch that other planets. Why not predicting our own planet, right? So we're doing amazing things, man. Amazing things,
Maybe because they don't have a bunch of crazy humans
right?
doing stuff to mess with the weather, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, and I
Yeah, it's
think
very
that's
interesting.
that's interesting, right? As we kind of look at that, I mean, I'll be very curious to see like what electric vehicles are going to do, right? So we kind of talk about that. Maybe there's a reduction in terms of fossil fuels that we're burning, right? But there's also a lot of manufacturing that's going to happen initially net new for the batteries, and a lot of mining that has to occur, right? So when I see some of that, right, um, there's a lot of that going on, and like, of course, I'm interested in the looking under the dirt, like Emil's commenting on my worm shirt, right? So I've got all kinds of hobbies and stuff that I do like that. And as we're looking under the hood, right, you've got to start understanding what are some of the components that are really driving that, right? And in this case, like we've got that with the workflow here with the earthquakes, where, okay, we understand um, not only where the surface location is, right, that the earthquake is starting the epicenter, but we also have the depth, right? So that's kind of interesting in this sense, where if we're looking at this, right, and we're just grabbing, so in this case, they were just grabbing the date, but we could even look at the time, right? So are earthquakes normally in the middle of the night locally? Is there something corresponding with UTC time, right? And then when we look at this, okay, is this just on the surface, right? So it's only, yeah, well, it's only 10 feet deep or 10 meters deep here, right? But then when we look at this, you can even see there's a couple different types that are listed here. And then also when we're looking at this, right, um, one of the questions that I have mentally, right, which I would definitely want to do some more analysis on, is if we're looking at this, are the bigger earthquakes on the surface, or is it that they are actually at greater depth, or does that not have any correlation, right? So if we were trying to do mining, right, maybe there's a lot of minerals and stuff right along those tectonic plates. So if we were to interested in doing stuff there, does that mean we should be careful on the surface and we shouldn't touch it at all, or we can only really go so deep before it causes problems? So it's just super interesting information, and you can kind of see, okay, it's also tracking what's the closest city, right? So if you were looking at this, I'd almost want to go in here and parse this and say, hey, what's the country, right? So in
Mhm.
Japan, most of the earthquakes occur on a Tuesday, right? There's 25 of them. So if you're trying to take a sick day or something, definitely a Tuesday is a good day. Um, and then as we kind of look here, right, it's kind of interesting. Most of the time it occurs at the beginning of the week,
Yeah.
right? And Iceland's on a Sunday. So um, if you're going to do a vacation, maybe away or if you live there and you want to do a vacation away, those are the better days, right? And then if you're going to those places, maybe you want to leave Wednesday and get back on a Saturday, right? So in case there is any earthquakes, you'd be less likely to be entangled in those.
Yeah, that's very interesting because think about it. All that data you're presenting here after all that analysis, that's really good for, a business doing extraction,
Yes.
mineral extraction or something like that, because that will affect their business at some point. If you have an earthquake really, being something normal to happen
Yeah.
close to a mine, you need to know about that because at some point that can be something risky to your business,
Yeah.
and you need to know, emergency plan to your employees, how they can, just leave the mining if something happened, if they have a quick way to do it, or even if the extraction is doing the best way to avoid to everything go down while they are
Exactly.
there. So yeah, that information is gold, man. It's really gold.
Yeah, I mean, even looking at this, if you're running drills, right? So when's a good
Mhm.
day to kind of run the drill? Like most people are getting in Monday and they're just kind of like schlumping in, right?
Exactly.
Um, so maybe we'd want to be conscious of that. I mean, the other thing that I look at is from a maintenance perspective, right? Either we're doing the maintenance cycles right before that, or maybe it's that day, right? Depending on what it is, you may not want people down there if there's some of those possibilities of issues, right? I almost think of like a simple example that most of us might be familiar with is what days do restaurants close, right? Excuse me. And like here in the US, you have Chick-fil-A closing on a Sunday, right? Theirs is for a religious reason. But like when I look at some other restaurants, you have like a lot of um, Asian restaurants will actually close on Mondays. So they still want the day off, right? But that day is typically a little slower for them. So they're like, let's just stay closed that day. I'm not going to close during a busy day on the weekend, right? And that kind of offsets the risk and rewards, right? In terms of getting a chance to rest, and then making sure that you're capturing all of those guests. So when I look at us taking care of the earth, right, we may even need to explore those different ways, like for crop rotation, et cetera, right? Um, how can we kind of dive into that? And as we're kind of talking about that, I've got uh, another one that I was actually playing with, trying to find a really good source for. This is actually ArcGIS, right? And when we talk about ArcGIS, a lot of people don't think of this being a data transformation platform, right? But you would be amazed at the depth that this has. So when we're looking at this, everybody might be like, oh, what's this area? I'll zoom out here. So this is actually Colorado. Um, and this is in Colorado Springs, right, which is an area that I used to live. And as you look at this, right, you can see it's right next to the mountain range. So you can see Castle Rock, and then here's Denver here. So it's just south of Denver. There's lots of military bases here. NORAD's over here. So they do like the um, satellites and tracking of objects and stuff in the air. So as we're kind of looking at this, right, this is the Earth, and you've got huge geographical formations here. And part of what I was doing from an analysis perspective, right, which I think is going to be huge in the future, is you obviously have satellite imagery, right? But now you even have kind of a middle layer for that, which is drones, right? So as we kind of talk about drones, that's something that I'll be touching on during my session, where they can do 3D imagery, like kind of hovering around, right, and do 3D modeling. And you're seeing that for everybody. So like farmers are kind of doing that, right? You have, if you haven't checked out a house lately, right, they all have somebody who hired a drone and they'll like basically do an aerial shot, and there's like of the pictures, 50 of them are outside, and then you've got 5 pictures in the house, and you're like, great, I'm really glad to see that my roof looks okay from 100 feet in the air, right? But I really wanted to see the bathroom or the bedrooms, right?
Right.
And when we look at this, right, it's having, we're excited about those new data points. And I think we just need to be conscious of how we incorporate them and kind of what some of that weight is, right? To kind of make those informed decisions. But this is kind of a great way of doing that. And when we look at this, let me see if I, nope, I don't think I saved the page here. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, here it is.
And okay.
Yeah, so this is literally one where they're looking at forest types, right? So you can start to see by using sensory information, they can monitor forest health, right? And it's not going to let me open this. I didn't set up the trial fully here. Yeah, because it's going to get, let's see if it gets mad. Yeah, so it won't let me access it because I don't have the account built out here. But what was cool with this, right, is as you start exploring that, you can have some of these thermographic maps where we're literally looking at climatology based on trees and the rest of our ecosystem. So you have some of these leading and lagging indicators, which will determine whether we're on a successful path for the environment.
Right. And actually, that's a really good thing for governments, for example, to control
Yeah,
the forest area in their country. And
exactly.
this way, yeah, and this way you can, do campaigns to talk with companies, maybe doing that burnings in the forest, or if maybe you have regions just suffering with the nature disasters, just because of the heat, because it's increasing, because of the climate change.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
can do things.
deforestation is huge, and it's interesting. I went to a conference, and I'll see if I can find the link. Um, but they actually were using satellites and monitoring temperatures and fires, and they would use that because a lot of the areas that have natural rainforests, right? Um, they're not exactly some of the most well-off nations when we're kind of talking about that, right? So having a satellite up in the air isn't exactly something that's feasible just to monitor forestation, right? So what some of this company actually did is they said, hey, let's make it easy, because I know that literally a forest ranger may have thousands of miles that they need to cover. How about we just give them an alert? So if we see something that's on fire in a satellite image, we'll actually send them a link, right, a push notification, and say, okay, I'm going to give you this insight, right, and tell you where that geolocation is. You can click on it and see the last satellite image, right? So you can understand, hey, was it um, just a lightning strike, right? Or is there clearing of forests going on? And they can analyze it based on over time, the analysis, right? Is it being eaten away? And I think we'll also be able to monitor reforestation projects, right? Which
Mhm.
there is one of those in Colorado. They literally called it the scar on the mountain. And that was actually from mining. So they had mined the side of the mountain, and you could see this huge scar where they had done that. And they actually went back in and they replanted trees. And I mean, that took about like 20 years, right? And you can still see some of it, but at least it's been replanted. So
Yeah, we need to begin, right?
yeah.
We need to start at some point. No, that's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, so I think that's interesting as well. To you can track where some event happen, so sometimes you just realize it about a forest burning
Yeah,
when it's already too late and we already lost, uh, you know, many miles of forest. But with that satellites, you also can track where that began, where that burning started, and that way you can try to track the reason of that as well. So if you know
exactly.
the reason, is the way to you also avoid to that happen again in the future, or at least to do things you can reduce the risk to that happen. So
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because when we talk about forestation, right, this is just like data. As business leaders, we make a lot of decisions, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to cut down, uh, let's say, all the resources or the size of the team, right? Because maybe we see a lot of fat in the sense of there's a lot of overhead here that's unnecessary, right? And when you look at an ecosystem, especially like a forest, right, or data set, we might see a lot of fat there, and our immediate goal is to kind of trim that down and make it as lean as possible, right? And typically, what you'll see, right, when that first happens is when you burn out a section of the forest, it's still really fertile. And that may be because you have some of the historical data or those resources that you're using, right? So basically, you're depleting the land, right, in which you're working with. And then over time, it just becomes where it's not sustainable, right? And then at that point, you look at the plot next to you and you're like, man, that looks green over there. Let me go over there and do the same thing, right? And we kind of see that with organizations. And I think with data sets, that's going to be common, especially as we see this explosion of data, right? Especially with weather data. This is a perfect example because you will have literally uh, high, low, and mid temperatures, right? For a
right.
day, and we may have those three columns dating back hundreds of
Hmm.
years, right?
Yeah.
But we're missing some of those other factors like humidity, et cetera. So if we just made decisions, right, back to that bakery example, based off of just those three factors, the temperature variance, right,
Hmm.
is that really going to create the outcome that we want? And I
Yeah,
think that's
it
where we need to
depends.
make sure that we're questioning some of that, right? Before we start cutting the data, right, and kind of thinning out the fertile land that we have in terms of the number of variables. And then maybe we're more selective and we say, okay, well, this forest is beautiful, right? Maybe before I cut any trees down, I'm going to go in and like strategically plant some of these things, right? They can exist within the forest. And then those trees are going to grow large, right? And then we know that those are the ones that are important and that matter. Now let's go in and maybe we'll cut down a couple of these strategically. And then, as an example, maybe replace the KPIs, right? So it gives us an
Right.
opportunity to see those grow and understand them before we just jump to conclusions and cut them down and then aren't fully aware of um, what it is that we're going to replace it with, right?
Right. Yeah, totally. You're totally right. And when you think about, taking that other parameters, not just like if we ran or not, if
Yeah.
you things like that. When you think about that, another thing that comes to my mind is also how that affects, the entertainment business.
Hmm.
Like, for example, this year we have the World Championship for soccer, you
Yeah.
know, that will happen. And actually, that was postponed a few months, uh,
Yeah.
because of the place where that will be, because
Yeah.
it'll be in Qatar. And in the month that usually it is, will be so dry and, so hot, the players can play.
Yeah.
So they decided to move it because will really be hard for them to play at that month, So it's not just because it's not raining, it's because it's too hot and too dry.
They're not
So
going
two
to do
things here.
ultra soccer like an ultra marathon, like only the
Right?
fittest will survive, right?
Yeah, it'll be just the stronger one will be standing up, you know.
Yeah.
It'll be like a survival mode, that soccer game, but
Whoever has the better Gatorade, right? That's
right?
gonna be
Like that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, and actually, that affects other sports as well, right? So,
Hmm.
if you think about races, car races, for example, Formula
Mm,
One, and
yeah.
you think about motor championships and other things, you can't just can't do it if it's raining a lot, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have someone crashing into the wall and will not be so good to see.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting again, right? As we kind of talk about this, when you get more sensors. So like there's sensors on cars, right? So there's LiDAR and these other technologies that we're using. It's interesting because when you talk about like the advancements that space did for us, right? A lot of that was disseminated down to commercial applications. And now I look at we've got reusable rockets, right? And the systems that they have in place. So like you were saying, hey, maybe we have to shift the time by a couple months, right? It's the same with uh, a rocket launch, right? Oh, there's
Mhm,
lightning. Yeah, no go, right?
mhm.
The same is true for these cars, and I think well, what we haven't done yet is examine this to where we can say, what would it take to operate fully at that same competitive level in those conditions, right? Because when we talk about weather on another planet, right? I don't know how far we can predict out today, but if it takes us, I don't know, 5 years to get to Venus, right? I'm pretty sure we're not going to be willing to wait, right, an extra year. Ooh, there's a really bad storm. We're just going to hang out here in space for a year until that passes, right? So we've got to start figuring out in those extremes, right? What are the extremes that we can support? Is it one standard deviation? Like I can take an earthquake, right? But I can't take a tsunami, right? And
Mhm.
we can kind of address some of those things because there will be, as humans, right? We will need more space and it will require us to be in more extreme conditions to live there. So,
Yeah, and one other point for that situation, for example, waiting around March in Mars, something like
mhm.
that. Think about it, that rocket will not be close to Earth, so you also have the communication issue.
Yeah.
So the message will not be so fast to go to there. So if something goes bad, that will take a while to go the message. So
Exactly. What do you mean?
you
It's
need,
not like Star Trek and we can just
right?
get them on a hologram up like that? I thought that's how it worked.
Yeah, or like in Star Wars, where with all the battleships there, and having much of noise, and everyone hearing that noise of explosions and that stuff. I always, I always believed that until I started to study and see that doesn't make any sense.
Nope. No.
You
No
know,
no real explosions, right? There's no
right?
oxygen there.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was disappointing.
Yeah.
I really wanted to hear explosions. Not just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all you would feel is the force, right? And then light. Um, it was actually interesting because they had a what was I watching? That's it's an Apple TV show where they literally talk about um, a solar flare wave, right? And it's a gravitational wave, and literally they showed like the surface of the moon, and I'm like, man, is this real? Is that why the surface of the moon is like that? And literally there was a solar flare, right? So they saw it, and they were like, you have 15 minutes to get back into the uh, space station, right, or into the lunar base, otherwise you're going to have radiation poisoning, right? And
Right.
what's interesting is because the moon had no atmosphere, right, which would be another data point, how thick is the atmosphere? When that wave came, right? You could see the surface of the moon. It was vibrating. It looked like little waves. And
Oh
it was
man,
so cool. I was like, man, so that's almost
impressive.
like sound waves, right? Are kind of
Hmm.
traveling through, and there was radiation contained in that. And it's like we don't even see that here on the earth, right? It's getting absorbed. So when we talk about all these things, right, we are assuming that we are the only factor from a data point perspective that's impacting the atmosphere, right? We're not even calculating anything that's outside, right? These external factors, meteors, all these things, right? Or maybe we're just not privy to that data. So when we kind of talk about those things, being more inclusive, I think is really going to be the renaissance that we're going to have over the next 10, 20 years, um, because we will have built up the analytics to that point.
Yeah, that's impressive, man. Yeah, always when I start to hear that things from the space, I just go crazy, man. Yeah, that's impressive for me. But yeah, but it's really interesting as well how all that other things from the space affects our lives here in the Earth as well.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the position of the Earth, uh, you know, for example, with the moon here close to us,
Hmm.
and how that affects the oceans, the ocean levels, and actually that affects, you know, ships trying to go through rivers and that things, because
Yep.
maybe the water level is good to go from there to there, but maybe not, and you have your ship, just stop it there at the middle of the river. And something like that happened a while ago. I don't know if you saw that here in
Oh
Brazil,
yeah. Yeah.
so and stop it. And actually, not just in Brazil, I think in uh,
What was it? The Suez? I think it was the Suez
the
Canal.
yes, West, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened that there as well. And any other ship was able to pass,
Yeah.
but just because the water level was not so high to pass there, and the guy there, driving that ship just didn't notice that and go to a place not so good to pass. So,
Well, and
everything like that.
it's crazy because
Yeah,
I didn't realize when I was doing some reading on that how they stack, like in this case, it was cars, right? How they
yeah.
stack the cars in the ship matters, because that
Hmm.
weight distribution, right, can play into things because you're on the ocean, right? So
Hmm.
all that thing, all those factors from a data point perspective are becoming more complex. And I was just talking with Trayson about that, even packing uh, packing freight, right, on
Hmm.
a truck.
Hmm.
The difference is right now we have human interaction, right? There'll be a driver, maybe he's driving in the wind a little bit, right? He can go and correct, or, oh, I should just pull over, right? When these
Hmm.
vehicles become autonomous, how are they factoring in all of those things related to the earth, right? They would need, they're not going to sense, oh, I hear wind whistling, right? There needs to be a sensor there to kind of factor into that. Oh, there's wind, I should slow down a little bit, right? Or
And
maybe I just need to pull over because the conditions are too strong.
yeah, and actually also connections to other networks
Hmm.
to get data and notifications from other systems,
Yeah.
already telling them what to do. Otherwise, they will be on the dark.
Well, it's got to
Just
be like a
going.
hive mind, right? So
Yeah,
that's almost
exactly.
tying into some of the topic that we have for next week, which is social media, right? So when we
Hmm.
talk about that, I think as humans, we're kind of learning how to interact from a hive mind perspective. And the question is, how are we going to handle some of those things, right? Is it going to be things that are destructive, right?
Yeah.
Um, or subtractive, right? In terms of what we're carving out, which is like a CNC machine, right? Or
Hmm.
carving out the earth and mining. Or is it going to be additive, right? Are we building things up like skyscrapers or what have you, right? Those, all
Hmm.
those things have pluses and minuses, so it'll be interesting to see how we do this. So yeah, if anyone's interested in presenting next week in regards to social media, Yamil Medina and myself will be kind of talking about that. So if you have any data transformation workflows related to that, please feel free to sign up. And we would love to have you on board and talk about that some more. Looks like we're here at time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marcus, for joining me. And we look forward to seeing you next week where we'll be talking about social media. And if you haven't signed up for Inspire yet, check out our feed because we'll be there as well as at Tableau conference, right? DM us directly and if you would like to meet up or would like to see what sessions we're doing. And we can't wait to see you all there and next week, as well as tomorrow for 3 charts at 3 p.m. Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Happy Tuesday.